So we've responded to Mitch McConnell, but you know who can probably do it a little bit better? I would say one of, I think, probably the greatest writer of my lifetime, a man named Ta-Nehisi Coates, who actually today at the hearing we were just talking about was able to give the opening statement. And it was almost just a direct response to Mitch McConnell, and it is delicious.
And so for a century after the Civil War, black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell. It is tempting to divorce this modern campaign of terror, of plunder, from enslavement. But the logic of enslavement, of white supremacy, respects no such borders. And the god of bondage was lustful and begat many heirs. Coup d'etats and convict leasing, vagrancy laws and debt peonage, redlining and racist GI bills, poll taxes and state-sponsored terrorism. We grant that Mr. McConnell was not alive for Appomattox, but he was alive for the electrocution of George Stinney. He was alive for the blinding of Isaac Woodward. He was alive to witness kleptocracy in his native Alabama and a regime premised on electoral theft. Majority Leader McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of black homeowners of some $4 billion. Victims of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word with the Majority Leader.
What do you guys think?
All facts and historically right on point. That, what a lot of people don't realize is that we went through an 11-year period where you had black people in leadership roles, particularly throughout the South, because the North was reluctant to trust those who had just come out of slavery in terms of their ownership. And through this 11-year period, people label it Reconstruction. But really what was happening was the South and the North were figuring out a way to organize themselves collectively against black life. Because the 1866 point in history, or 1877 point in history all the way into the 1920s was more violent than the time in slavery. Because if you think about what changed was now you're no longer my property. Now you're no longer an asset. So me killing you meant nothing. If you get a chance, I'm a book guy. So the last book is well, not the last book, but a book called All God's Children, written by Fox Butterfield. But in the first 60 pages of that book, he talks about the type of direct, wanton violence against black life. You're speaking of vile people. Strom Thurmond's grandfather, I believe it was, they were still dueling in South Carolina in the 1880s and 1890s. There were more guns. South Carolina's murder rate was 8 times that of the murder rate in New Orleans at the height of the murder rate in New Orleans in the 90s. That's how violent South Carolina was. And most of that violence was white against black violence. There are stories of people testing out guns on black people and pow, killing them. The whole idea of these juries coming together to see if a crime was actually committed began in this period. So yeah, he died, but he died because he was overweight.
Let's get into that. Listen, let's switch over to that. Let's get into that. People, may not know, but that Eric Garner passed away because he was we all saw him in a chokehold.
That's right.
The police officer took him down with a chokehold, and there was a hearing because this police officer wants to be back on the streets. And there was a hearing, he got to get away with not testifying. So after all these years, Eric Garner has lost her granddaughter, she's lost her son, Eric Garner's mother, has lost her granddaughter, has lost her son, and is there every day during this hearing to hear what this officer finally had to say. And he didn't speak, he got to give his testimony essentially in secret with redacted transcripts. And his lawyer stood up and said Eric Garner died because he was overweight. Well, we all saw that video.
Yes. It's got to the point where it doesn't even matter. So we see videos.
Right.
It goes back to the legacy when I was talking about the legacy of economic legacies and passing things down to your kids. And these not necessarily the beginnings, but this is where the judicial system, where it's an imbalanced judicial system, has started from things like that. And like you said, up to today, we're still doing the same thing we've done before, which is passing down what we've always done. Things like, well, that's the way we do it. This is the best. And instead we do it. We have titles, the best judicial system in the world.
Right.
The most just country ever.
Right.
But we're imprisoning people at such a rate, which we'll get to later. There's so many aspects to get to today.
Right.
But there was one thing, I'm sorry, I know we're going on this. We're talking about how the benefit of, say, reparations, and this asks a lot of Democratic candidates now. And I was saying this before during one of the town halls that was said. I was like, I don't think anyone's taking it seriously, because the thought goes straight to what Mitch McConnell said was, how are you gonna do that?
Right.
So it ends up being a punchline that makes Democratic candidates that are running for president now say, well, I gotta get black folks on my side. I'll say it, sure. And we'll come up with a plan later. I'm not saying they're all not serious about it, but they don't have to be, because you still need the society to back up what you're doing. So the argument a lot of times is when this is a black holiday, Juneteenth, reparations, black folks. This benefits the entire country. Right. So this is why this morning when I was tweeted, I was saying, you know what? Everyone should care about this holiday, because if you care about the sins, and you see the way Mitch McConnell smirked when he said the sins of the country, because he doesn't give a damn.
He doesn't believe it's a sin.
Absolutely, because I gotta say it's a sin. When he said the sins of our country, if you actually cared about the fact that this day commemorates the end of slavery, and you really thought it was one of the worst things ever, you should be celebrating it too. If you hated the atrocities of our country, and you're like, oh, I'm glad my ancestors stopped with that, or I'm glad they were, forced to stop doing that. Maybe a little bit of this is off of my back now. If you actually cared about an inclusive country, you would care about it. It's not a black issue. Yeah. This is a country, like we've talked about a million times. Slaves built this country. So when it's built, you should have some inclusion as to the fact that it happened that way, not as a punishment.
Right.
Oh, how are you gonna punish me? When folks are accused of racism, they're like, you can't punish me by saying this. Hey, how about you sit in your discomfort for a second and realize that this is a chance for you to learn something about yourself. All of us have had to before. I come from a privileged level of community. Hey, I'm a guy. I have a certain level of privilege over women, black women. In many instances, I can go into an office and then I'll be treated a certain way versus black women. It's just the way it works. It depends on who's above and making those decisions, but I've experienced it. So for me to not recognize my points of privilege, it's not gonna change anything.
Yeah, but the point in why they don't recognize their privilege is because it's the thought that, oh, well, you came up on your own, and this country is great because of something that you did, not necessarily that you came on the backs of other people, or that other people are the reason you are in the position you are today. And I think that is part of the problematic aspect, that it's not necessarily looking to point fingers or take blame, it's looking to acknowledge. And also reparations, again, it comes in a lot of forms, not necessarily just money. But something I kind of wanted to say on the reparations angle is, when they say, oh, well, how can we determine it? They used 1/16 against us. So you can't tell me with 23andMe today that you can't tell who you're gonna give it to. Don't. It's like, don't come here with
you
that.
are finding murderers from 40 years ago. Because somebody spit in a tube and mailed it off to a tech company. You can figure it out, okay? Or how about just give it to everybody? Because your ancestors literally went over to a country and shackled people and brought them back over here stacked on top of each other in ships. And they did build this country. And you're right about the holiday, because if you really did care, just society in general, Mount Rushmore wouldn't exist. Stone Mountain, Georgia wouldn't exist. Like every single Confederate monument would be torn down. If you cared, we would celebrate Juneteenth harder than we do July 4th and Thanksgiving. Because say what you want, I guess one could say like the negative aspects of July 4th outweigh the positive that this country exists. But the people who built the country, them finally having freedom, that should be more important to you. And everything that we all went out on our own, because again, we don't learn these things in school. Learned about Thanksgiving, it's actually not at all as pretty. It's actually a horror show.
Yes.
But I like turkey too, you're right, this would be something that not only we all are taught about and we know about, but that we celebrate, because it was the day that everybody in this country was free. It wasn't the day that we all got to vote. When, you know what I mean? It wasn't the day that we all got equal rights, but it was the day that everyone in this country was legally free. And then Jim Crow started too, so it was the start of that. But so actually, there's nothing great about this country. Okay, let's go home. No, I'm kidding.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.